So my name is Michael Dowd. My wife Connie Barlow and I have lived permanently traveling North America for the last 5.5 years. And we don't have a home, we don't have a storage bin. I mean, we live permanently out of the generosity of those who open up their homes to us. And what we do is we teach and preach a sacred, meaningful, hopefully inspiring way of thinking about the entire history of the universe. That is, we tell the 14 billion year epic of cosmic Earth, life, and human history as a sacred narrative, as a creation story that hopefully can touch, move, and inspire all of us to co-create a just, healthy, and sustainable life-giving future. So the title of this program is Thank God for Evolution, How the Marriage of Science and Religion can transform your life, or will transform your life and our world. Have any of you seen this image yet? Oh, it's one of my favorites. This is an uncolored, touched-up photo from the Cassini mission. This is a solar eclipse. The sun is directly behind Saturn. See a little piece of the sun right there? And that little dot right there is planet Earth. Check this out, right there. Is that extraordinary? I love that image. Connie and I call the epic of evolution the great story because it's a story that includes all stories. There's no cultural story, there's no religious story, there's no human story that's not part of the universe story. And we say what we promote is the marriage of science and religion for personal and planetary well-being. In some circles, I call this program the Gospel According to St. Charles. Darwin, that is. Or in certain Christian circles, I'll call it Why Jesus Loves Darwin and You Can Too. We actually had this on the side of our van. We have it on the side of our van now, and we were driving in the south, you know, northern Florida, Alabama, Georgia. We get some interesting looks and occasionally some interesting gestures. We pulled into Lawrence, Kansas, and this biology professor looked at the side of the van and he goes, "Oh great, you just piss everybody off." Brian Swim, many of you are familiar with, is a cosmologist, a physicist. He says, all professions, all work, all activity in the human world finds its essential meaning in the context of a people's cosmic story. Now, what he means by a people's cosmic story is their cosmology. It's their creation story. It's their story or set of stories that explain where did we come from, why are things like they are, where's everything seem to be going, and why we're special as a people. And all cultures have this. There's not a single culture anywhere in the world that doesn't have a cosmology or creation myth. Now, what makes this epic of evolution different from earlier cosmologies, we've identified a number of things. First is that it's meta-religious. That is, it's not a religious perspective in competition with other existing religious perspectives. It's meta-religious. It feeds and nourishes all traditions. It's a creation story that's not yet over. It's not like divine creation happened in the distant past somewhere. No, divine creation is ongoing right till this moment. The emphasis is on this world reality. It's not about an otherworldly vision of the future that's inspiring. It's about a this world vision of the future that's inspiring. For example, many Christians have the belief, as I once did, I used to be an anti-evolutionary fundamentalist myself. I actively opposed people who taught evolution. I had a small stack of tracts and would argue with anybody who thought the world was more than 6,000 years old. And I believed that Jesus, the second coming of Christ, the way I interpreted that at that time, was that Jesus was coming down on the clouds and the true believers, the faithful, were going to be raptured up, that is to fly through the air to meet with the Lord in the sky. That for me at that time was an inspiring otherworldly vision of the future. There are some angry young Muslim men that are inspired by the vision of having 72 virgins for an eternity if they blow themselves up with dynamite in a public place. That for them is an inspiring otherworldly vision of the future. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an inspiring this world vision of the future. It's shaped by the global perspective of science. There's Christian scientists, Hindu scientists, Buddhist scientists, atheist scientists, scientists of all religious tradition and no religious tradition that are contributing to one common understanding of the nature of reality. It celebrates radically different interpretations. This perspective doesn't just tolerate a multiplicity of interpretations, it actually welcomes them. And then finally, it's the story of the changing story. It's hard to be a great story fundamentalist because the science keeps us humble. For example, 3.5 years ago on our website, Connie put up a parable called Pluto, the Adopted Planet. Well, as you know, if you watched the news last year or a year and a half ago, Pluto has been officially demoted. Pluto is now considered a dwarf planet. Somebody sent us this cartoon, I love it. I can't believe I have to sit at the little planet's table. Poor Pluto. It's a rough life for teeny planets. Ed Wilson is one of the great biologists of the 20th century. He's at Harvard. He says, the evolutionary epic is probably the best myth that we will ever have. Now, what he means by myth isn't an untrue story. He's using it the way that Joseph Campbell used the term. A narrative that puts us in accord with the universe. A big picture understanding that helps us feel our connection to the whole. I've identified what I call 3 great gifts of the great story. It's really why I say thank God for evolution. The first is that a sacred understanding of the history of the universe. And when I say evolution, that's really what I'm meaning, is the entire history of the universe. So a sacred, to use Christian language, a sacred God-glorifying understanding of the history of the universe realizes religion. That is, it takes what we thought were supernatural or otherworldly religious ideals and realizes them. Shows how they're real for everybody, everywhere. They can be understood as undeniably real because they're not merely about what we think or imagine, but what we all know through our experience. It sanctifies science as it shows what science is doing as a sacred enterprise. Science is a holy endeavor. It's a sacred undertaking. And it reveals the true magnitude of both science and religion. It offers a sacred understanding of evolution offers a clear, realistically inspiring, and empowering vision of our way into a just, healthy, sustainable, and life-giving future for all species, or for as many species as possible. A thriving future for us and as many species as possible. And then finally, a sacred understanding of evolution positively transforms people's lives and relationships in a more consistent, comprehensive, and ongoing way than traditional religion generally can. In other words, in a more durable and dependable way than traditional religious or secular approaches generally can. Now, I realize these are bold claims I'm making. You're going to decide whether you think I'm accurate on these or not. A distinction that I'll come back to again and again throughout this program is the distinction between private and public revelation. Private revelation is an insight that comes through the psyche of one individual who then has to communicate that insight to others, and others then believe or not. You know, Moses goes to the top of the mountain and God reveals something, and then he tells other people about it. And they believe him or not. The Apostle Paul is on the road to Damascus, blinding flash of light, revelation, he tells other people about it. Well, private revelation, by its very nature, produces religious believers or unbelievers. Because if an insight comes to you and you tell someone about it, they may or may not believe you. Public revelation is what's being revealed about the nature of reality. What's so? What's divinely true? What's fundamentally so about the nature of reality that's coming not merely through the psyche of one individual, although sometimes it's introduced that way. You know, Einstein has a vision of riding on a beam of light and has this insight, and then writes a paper about it. But then the entire scientific community goes to work trying to disprove it. There's a skeptical approach to science that's all about trying to discern, trying to find out if this is really true. And it's collective intelligence. The scientific enterprise is really about not just the intelligence of one individual, it's a collective intelligence endeavor. It really results in what we call public revelation. And public revelation can produce religious knowers. And I believe that in my lifetime, I'm only 48. I believe in my lifetime the majority of the world's religious believers will become religious knowers. They won't leave their religious traditions. They're still, 50 years from now, they're still going to be Christians and, Buddhists and Hindus and Catholics and Protestants and, Jews and the whole gamut of religious people. But they will have moved from being mere believers to knowers, because this is validating and furthering, the science-based public revelation is validating and furthering understanding of the ancient private revelations. I'll say a whole lot more about that. Let me say it this way. I believe that evolution will usher religion into its greatness in the 21st century. That no religion could possibly come into its glory. No religion could emerge into its full potential until deep time was understood. Why? Because all religions came into being when people thought the world was flat, stationary, and everything revolved around us. In fact, people, didn't believe that the sun and the stars revolved around us. They thought they knew it. It was like, go out and look, duh, because that's the way it all appears. And yet today, we have such a more expansive understanding of the nature of reality than the ancients could have possibly had. So if the meaning and significance of our religious traditions don't grow commensurate with that knowledge, we're doing our traditions a terrible disservice. That's why, as I said, I think evolution will usher religion into its greatness in the 21st century. So here's what I consider to be the most significant, in terms of its cultural impact, of the science-based, what I call public revelations. The nested, emergent nature of divine creativity. The nested, emergent nature of divine creativity. Now let me unpack what I mean by that. First of all, when I use the word divine creativity, what I mean is the power to bring something new into existence that never existed before. I mean, that's a classic attribute of the divine, right? The creator, that force that created, that reality that created everything, that brought everything into existence. What we now know, and I say know rather than believe, is that ultimate creativity didn't merely exist at the beginning of time and make everything the way a potter makes a pot or a carpenter makes a table. That divine creativity, ultimate creativity, exists throughout the entire universe in a nested sense. Subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, within planets, within galaxies. In other words, all the way up and all the way down, at every level, creativity exists. Every level expresses divine creativity, reveals divine creativity. That is, every level can bring something new into existence that never existed before. Molecules in community are creative. Hydrogen and oxygen come together, create water. Stars are creative. I mean, stars create the very atoms of our bodies. The periodic table of elements, we now know how God created the atoms inside stars, other than hydrogen at the beginning of time. We'll do more about this later today. And when I say the nested emergent nature of divine creativity, what I mean is what we see over time, and again, this is evidential based. This is based on evidence, not on authority, not on tradition. It's based on evidence. It's public revelation. That the universe as a whole has gone from simple atoms. First, it was just hydrogen, the simplest atom. That was the first atom that was created. And then more complex atoms. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. And then more complex atoms, and then molecules, and more complex molecules, and creatures, and more complex creatures, and then societies, and more complex societies. And it's one emergent process that we grow out of. We emerge out of this process. We didn't come into the world, we grew out of it. In the same way that apples grow out of an apple tree. And you can use theological language to talk about this and say that this is how God created us, and that's completely legitimate to do that. Or you can use non-theological language. Both are legitimate ways of talking about it. In fact, there's always at least one literal, factual, scientific way to talk about something, and innumerable, religious, meaningful ways to talk about the very same process, the very same thing. I'll come back to that again. So the nested emergent nature of divine creativity. Now here's the thing though. Here I've got these nested dolls separated out, right? But in reality they're all nested inside of each other, right? I just did this for illustration. But we are a subset of the process. We're part of the process. We are the universe, after some 14 billion years of unbroken evolution, now becoming conscious of itself. We are the universe literally becoming aware of itself. We're nature uncovering its own nature. And because we're a subset of the whole, we can't get outside the whole to examine it. So we have to use analogies and metaphors to describe the nature of ultimate reality, or the nature of the whole. First give a visual image of this emergent complexity, this direction. I call it the holy trajectory of evolution, the sacred direction of evolution. Now I've got this coming down. I could have it going up, I could have it going left and right from a center. The only reason that I wanted to get this flow going down is because I wanted to get away from the idea that more complex is better. More complex is not better. It's just more complex. New possibilities open up, but I mean, we need to be humble. Unquestionably, the most important form of life, from a biological standpoint, unquestionably, the most important form of life on planet Earth is bacteria. We couldn't last a half a day without them. They'd do just fine without us. So I think it's important to maintain an attitude of humility. So at one time, all there were linked molecules. And then the first most primitive form of bacteria, prokaryotic bacteria, cells without a nucleus, evolving most likely under the crust because of the protection from bombardment, seems to have been important for life. And also the fact, the pressure, right? So you've got, all these asteroids hitting, and then you've got the pressure seems to have been important. These cells come to the surface and start eating sunlight. And now, as photosynthetic bacteria, they're pumping a toxic byproduct out of the atmosphere, which is oxygen. See, there's very little oxygen in the early Earth's atmosphere. And so for 2 billion years, oxygen builds up, oxygen builds up, oxygen builds up, and finally, after 2 billion years, enough oxygen builds up. It wouldn't be enough to support our form of complex life, but for them it was toxic. And basically what happened was bacteria all over the world started dying. See, there wasn't an environmentalist among them. They didn't care. They were going to pollute and pollute and pollute, right? It was the first major pollution crisis, literally the first major pollution crisis in Earth's history. And it was solved by formerly competitive prokaryotic bacteria began cooperating and created the eukaryotic cell, that is a cell with a nucleus. And these bacteria started cooperating not because they were altruistic little heart-centered bacteria. This is before hearts. They cooperated because they were up against survival, and the cooperative survived. From an evolutionary standpoint, the question, why cooperate, is almost always answered this way. Because cooperative individuals and organizations will typically outcompete non-cooperative individuals and organizations. Cooperation and competition drive each other's, not either or. Multicellularity, multicellular organisms, you've got plants, animals, and fungi. These three great branches of life, right, are possible because for the second time, bacteria figured out, right, or stumbled into, or were guided by the environment, or guided by God, however you want to talk about it, but they came to be such that my self-interest, your self-interest, and our self-interest was the same self-interest. See, it's the aligning of the self-interest of the part and the well-being of the whole that the part is a part of that drives complexity in evolution. Meaning, if the part does well to the whole, it benefits. And if the part harms the whole, there's some cost to the part. There's some disadvantage to the part. And remember before when I showed the nesting dolls, right? The dolls within dolls? God, or Allah, or the goddess, or Great Spirit, or other divine names are proper names, sacred names, for that ultimate reality that includes all other realities, yet transcends all other realities. In other words, the only reality that's not a subset of some larger, more comprehensive creativity, or more comprehensive reality. Now, you don't have to use divine names to talk about ultimate reality, but clearly it would be legitimate to do so, and it has traditionally been done. In mammals, we find a degree of social complexity in mammals that you don't find among reptiles. You don't find groups of reptiles cooperating in the way that you do find groups of mammals cooperating. And then in humans, we began cooperating in the scale of families and clans. Prior to speech, prior to language, basically prior to words, prior to symbolic words, we have no evidence of social cooperation or complexity beyond, say, 20 or 30 people. Okay? But then, with beliefs, with moral codes, see, with language, we can have beliefs and moral codes, and we can begin cooperating at the scale of, say, 200 or 300 people, an ethnic tribe. I mean, how do you get 300 people to cooperate as an interdependent entity? It's not going to happen instinctually. We won't naturally cooperate with that many people because it's too complex. We need beliefs, we need moral codes. That's what facilitates cooperation at that scale. Now, how do you get, say, 10 or 12 tribes to cooperate at the scale of, say, 10,000 or 15,000 people? Well, it typically takes a chief or a king or a warlord. It takes some dominant leadership that says, you will cooperate or else. Now, in between these two, we also find Neolithic villages. They're not nearly so in fact, they're usually not patriarchal at all, but they're also more at this size scale. They're not nearly at this size scale. Then we see theocracies in early nations. Now, how do you get 1 million people to cooperate as an interdependent entity? Well, it takes writing and mathematics. We don't find any level of cooperation prior to writing and mathematics at that scale. See, notice, how information is stored and how it's shared is one of the drivers of complexity in evolution. Information is stored and shared differently at each level. In the same way, every level has to figure out how to align the self-interest of the part with the well-being of the whole that the part is a part of. So that if the part does well to the whole, it benefits, and so on, like I said before. So that it's in the self-interest of the part to do well to the whole, and it's also in the self-interest of the part not to harm the whole. That's a primary driver of complexity in evolution. Then we see corporate states, global markets, social democracies, the United Nations. In other words, at each level we see cooperation, complexity, and interdependence at larger and wider scale, both in the pre-human world and then in the human world. Now, if the pattern continues, which there's no guarantee that it will, we don't have any evidence of a supreme intelligence outside the system that's pulling strings and making it happen in a particular way. We have no evidence whatsoever of that. What we do have is lots of evidence that the process itself is creative, that creativity, divine creativity, is immanent within the process, right? And so if the pattern continues, in other words, if we don't destroy ourselves, we are likely to see these next two emerge. Global governance does not mean global government. What it does mean is where we govern ourselves as a species so that individuals, corporations, and nation states that serve the common good benefit, and the more good they do to the common good, the more they benefit. And individuals, corporations, and nation states that disregard or harm the common good are taxed or penalized, or there's moral strictures. In other words, so that it's in the self-interest of individuals, corporations, and nation states to do the right, just, ecological thing, and it's also in their self-interest to not do the unjust, unecological thing. And a biocracy is the same thing as a democracy. The only difference is it takes the health and the well-being and the voice of the natural world into the democratic process. So individual humans represent the rights of other species or watersheds and this sort of thing. And then finally, what Joel de Rosnay calls the symbiotic human. He wrote an international best-selling book called The Symbiotic Man. It was translated from French into English as The Symbiotic Man. It should have been The Symbiotic Human. It had a god-awful cover, and so it didn't sell well here in the States, which was really unfortunate because it's a fabulous book. He talks about the cybiont, which is cybernetics, biology, and ont is the whole. That is, what he means is humans, human technology, and nature as one mutually enhancing symbiotic organism. It's like we're creating a life form, it's like almost like we're creating a eukaryotic cell at the scale of the planet, where our energy flows, our material flows, our communication systems, it's almost like we're creating a cell at the scale of a planet. And again, this is not the only vision of what would this process would be look like if it continues, but it's one of the most inspiring international visions at this time. As part of the whole, begins to become self-reflexively aware, that is to self-conscious, how does it come to understand the nature of ultimate reality, the nature of the whole that it's a part of? Well, people living in different parts of the world would have reflected on different plants, different animals, different terrain, and different climate. And so the words that they would create, I mean, our words are based on our experience, right? And our stringing together of words into stories that explain where did we come from, why are we here, where are we going, and why we're special as a people are going to be different. I mean, necessarily. I mean, let's say those of us on this side of the room here, let's say we had never experienced sheep. The Lamb of God would not be part of our tradition. If we over here had never experienced the political reality of a king, the kingdom of God would be a totally foreign concept. We'd tell stories of lotus blossoms or whatever was a part of our experience. So all religions make sense given the different bioregions and cultures in which they emerge. Now, this doesn't mean that all religions make sense if you interpret their core doctrines in a literalistic way, right? So one tradition talks about, God as a great turtle, and somebody else talks about God as father and king, and another culture talks about the great goddess, that they're thinking that we're arguing about something that's fundamentally so. No, those are different metaphors to describe the nature of ultimate reality. I mean, it's not a surprise that in lush tropical climates, we find very different gods and goddesses emerging than in harsh desert climates. It's like this is to be expected. So what's the nature of reality? I mean, it's a pretty fundamental human question. 10,000 years ago, in most parts of the world, people looked out and about and around them and said, mother. In other words, the primary analogy or metaphor to describe the nature of the whole or the nature of ultimate reality was the female. Because, that was the lenses, that was the paradigm through which people were viewing. The great goddess, the earth mother. And this makes sense because out of women, our species continues, right? And we can see the same was true of all other species. So whatever brought everything into existence must be like a woman. Well, then about 5,000 years ago, we see a new technology begin to develop, actually two technologies that begin to shift the metaphors from feminine to masculine. And the two technologies, one of them is the plow. Plows take male upper body strength, right? So men begin to step in and become the primary food providers, roughly at the same time that writing develops. And writing promotes a sequential, linear, abstract, one could even say patriarchal way of thinking. In fact, there was a best-selling book for a couple of years called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, written by Leonard Schlein. He's a brain surgeon in California. And among other things, what he talks about is that when writing and the plow come into a culture very quickly, usually in less than 1,000 years, the major metaphors for ultimacy shift from feminine to masculine, meaning the goddesses are replaced by the gods. Now, reality is father, lord, king, warrior, these strong dominant male images. But again, it's the whole of reality it's being referred to. It's not just a big daddy in the sky somewhere. So about 500 years ago, a new technology comes into being, and we almost always use our new and exciting technologies as metaphors. And the technology was that of a clock. See, clocks had recently been invented. See, today you hear people talking about how the human brain is like a computer, right? Some people talk about it that way. Well, we couldn't talk that way if we didn't have computers. And so, not long after clocks were invented, clocks became a compelling analogy for what the whole of reality was like. Now, reality was not mother or father. Those are quaint. Reality is like a complex clock. And the more that we break it down into its component parts, we then think we understand the whole. In the way that we do clocks. I mean, if you take your watch apart and you know all the parts and how they function together, you understand the whole of it. If I take this projector apart and I know all the parts and how it functions together, I understand the whole of it. The whole of this projector is nothing but the sum of its parts. The whole of your watch is nothing but the sum of its parts. In fact, all human-made artifacts, the whole is nothing but the sum of its parts. However, in living systems, it's not that way. The whole of a molecule of water is more than the sum of the hydrogen and oxygen that make it up. There's this emergent moreness. You are more than the sum of the chemical elements that make you up. There's this emergent moreness. However, in a mechanistic universe, that is when you think the universe is like a complex clock, where's the only place that divine creativity can possibly exist with respect to a clockwork universe? Outside of it. Because all clocks have the creativity that made it outside of it. Whoever made that clock back there is outside of it. Whoever made this projector is outside of it. Whoever made your watch is outside of it. So if you imagine how nature is like a complex clock, God, or ultimate creativity, has got to exist outside, only outside. So even though in the Western traditions we've spoken of the immanence and the omnipresence of God, that is, there's no place that God stops and something else starts, we couldn't imagine how that was so as long as we had a mechanistic understanding of the universe. We couldn't close our eyes and feel how that could be so. We could still mouth the words, but we couldn't actually feel or experience how that could be so. So God begins to become trivialized. In fact, in the 17th century, we see trivial notions of God emerge. God begins to be identified as a supreme landlord residing off the planet and outside the universe and completely divorced from this natural world. Exiled from the natural world. The creator outside, and you see this distinction. Worship the creator, not the creation, as though the two are completely distinct and unrelated. And still many Christians fear that today. I'll come back to that. But this sense of the immanence and omnipresence of God was lost, so God becomes trivialized. You know, a supreme engineer that made this clockwork universe. And the big debate, does God intervene in his creation, or does he not? Well, both of them presuppose a trivial notion of God. So what I want to talk about now is there a way of talking about ultimate reality? That we can find common ground, that theists, atheists, pantheists, panentheists can find common ground so that we can cooperate across ethnic and religious differences in service of a thriving world for all species, or for as many species as possible. And what I'm about to share with you, about a year and a half ago, I shared this exact same program. I mean, I didn't change a slide. I did it the exact same way. I did the exact same program a year and a half ago in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I did the program with a group of Christians on Tuesday night, with a group of atheists, agnostics, and free thinkers on Wednesday night. And the vast majority of people at both programs loved it. Now that tells me we're onto something. I find that encouraging. St. Thomas Aquinas, as many of you know, is one of the Christian church's greatest theologians. And 750 years ago, he said, a mistake about creation will necessarily result in a mistake about God. Now, if that's true, what it means, among other things, is the more we learn about the nature of creation, the more we learn about the nature of the universe, right? If we're not updating what we mean by this word, if we're not updating what we mean by God, we may have definitions of God that are no longer life-giving. In fact, they may be deadly. And the example that I use is from the biological world, is that 2 billion years ago, what was essential for life to thrive was about 3% oxygen. Much more, much less, life couldn't thrive. It was all bacteria. Yet today, anything less than 15% oxygen, and none of us in this room would be alive. In fact, no mammals would be alive. So what was essential for life to thrive at one time can become deadly at a later time in an evolving cosmos. in an emergent cosmos. And the same is true of our religious traditions, our religious language. If what our religious words mean today is the same thing as they meant 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, we may be way out of step with what is truly life-giving. Now, sometimes those on the more conservative end of the spectrum, and I'm not just talking conservative Christians, but conservatives of other traditions as well, will ask me somewhere around this point in my program, what are you anyway? Are you a theist, or are you an atheist, or are you a pantheist? I can't tell what you are. If somebody says to me, are you a theist, an atheist, or a pantheist, I typically say yes. Or no, none of them nail it, and some of them, and part of what they all say says something about where I'm at. In fact, I had to coin my own term. I say, I'm a creatheist. Oh, and my wife, Connie, she's a creatheist. Now, we spell it the same way. We mean the exact same thing by it. We just pronounce it differently. I'm a creatheist, and she's a creatheist. And here's what we mean. It's a meta-religious scientific worldview. It's not a belief system. You don't have to believe anything to be a creatheist or a creatheist. It's not about believing in anything. It's about what we all know through the sciences. Again, it's what 98% of the scientists of the world would agree with. They may have not languaged it like this, but I've done this program in every kind of religious and non-religious setting you can imagine, and nobody takes issue with this. Or at least they haven't yet. Here are the three main components of what I call creatheism or creatheism. The first is that the whole of reality is creative. Creativity doesn't just exist outside the universe. Creativity, the whole is creative in a nested, directional, emergent sense. And I want to say something about this word directional, because there are ways of talking about evolutionary directionality, right, that are not accurate scientifically. This is not what's called teleology, where there's some intelligence outside the system that's pre-programmed or that's making it happen or that it's going towards some preset goal. We don't have evidence of that. We, again, have evidence that the process is creative. So I'm talking about this directionality in a very specific way, that what we see from our vantage point now is greater complexity emerging out of lesser complexity, not without setbacks. There have been serious setbacks. But life just keeps dusting itself off and going about this process of greater interdependence, cooperation, and complexity at larger and wider scale. And, as I said before, we're part of the process. We are the universe becoming aware of itself. We are nature uncovering its own nature. A human being looking through a telescope is literally the universe looking at itself and just gawking, like, wow. A biology student looking through a microscope is planet Earth learning with awareness, with consciousness, how it's functioned unconsciously and instinctually for billions of years. So we're part of the process. We are nature. And then, again, because we're a subset of the whole and can't get outside the whole to examine it, there's no one right way, and there's many legitimate ways to interpret or to model or to think or speak about the whole over time. Creatheism, or creatheism if you prefer, in particular, and evolutionary spirituality in general, honor the wisdom of reality as a whole. And this perspective, like nesting dolls, transcends but also includes traditional theism, atheism, religious non-theism. In fact, many Eastern traditions would consider themselves religious non-theists, deism, pantheism, and panentheism. And for those of you that are not familiar with this term panentheism, it comes out of process theology. It means God in creation, creation in God. It's like the Apostle Paul talking about that in him we live and move and have our being. What I'm suggesting is these four things. There is such a thing as the whole of reality, measurable and non-measurable. That God, or the goddess, if you prefer, or any other divine name, is a legitimate, though not necessary, proper name for this ultimate reality. You don't have to call the largest nesting doll God, right? But if divine names aren't legitimate for that one reality that includes all of the realities, it transcends all of the realities, I don't know what is. And sometimes people will say, well, Michael, what if there isn't some ultimate reality, but what if it's infinite in all directions? Like it goes infinitely out and infinitely small. Well, that's what I'm pointing to. That infinite, right, personified. If we personify that infinite reality, that's what I'm meaning by God. personal metaphors comfort, inspire, and empower billions of people. It's not a surprise that we find personal metaphors used to describe the nature of ultimacy. In fact, if you're going to have a meaningful relationship to the whole, you're going to tend to use meaningful metaphors, relational metaphors. I mean, think about every meaningful relationship that you have with anything in your life. Okay, think about every meaningful relationship you've got. I'm willing to bet that all your meaningful relationships are with he's, she's, and living it's. We don't tend to have meaningful relationships with non-living it's. Now, maybe you've got a boat or a motorcycle or you've got something that's a non-living it that's really, really precious to you, that's really important to you. Okay, well, but most of our meaningful relationships are with the he's, she's, and living it's. I mean, this stool, I use this stool in all of my presentations. In between presentations, it sits between Connie's and my seat in the van, and we rest our elbows on it. I really like this stool. I don't have a meaningful relationship with it. It's a non-living it. And so it's not a surprise that what we find all over the world is people using meaningful relational metaphors to describe the nature of the whole, or the nature of ultimacy. And then finally, this perspective, this creatheistic or creatheistic perspective, trumps all exclusively supernatural or otherworldly conceptions of the divine for the simple reason that it includes them all in its comprehensive fullness. This is one of the most important things I'm going to say this morning. This perspective transcends believing or disbelieving anything. It's not about beliefs, it's about what we know. I mean, do you believe in water? Oh, come on, do you believe in water? I mean, it doesn't, let's put it this way, it doesn't matter whether you believe in water or not, right? We're 60 to 70% water. We wouldn't exist without water. Whether you believe in it or not is irrelevant. It's like, do you believe in reality or do you believe in life? Excuse me, do you believe in the universe, right? It's like, it doesn't matter whether you believe in the universe. We're part of the universe. It doesn't matter whether you believe in life or not. Now, what you say about life, that's believable or not. Somebody can say, life is so kind and wonderful. Somebody else says, life sucks, it's terrible. Now, that's believable or not depending upon your experience, right? But the fact of life just is. I mean, it doesn't matter, let's put it this way. It doesn't matter whether you believe in reality or not. Reality is something that every plant, every animal, and every human being cannot not experience, inwardly and outwardly. In fact, let me say it like this, okay? Any God that can be believed in or not believed in is precisely what I'm not talking about. If when you hear the word God, you're thinking of something that can be believed or not, that's not what I'm talking about. In fact, I love this quote. It's one of my favorites. Phil Dick says, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And that is what I'm pointing to. Nothing less than that is what I'm pointing to when I use the word God. In fact, I dedicate my book, Thank God for Evolution, is dedicated to the glory of God. I say, I dedicate this book to the glory of God. And then I have a little asterisk. And the asterisk at the bottom says, not any God that we may think about, talk about, believe in, or deny, but the one true God we all know and experience. So when we look deeply enough, we see that every creature reveals a face of the divine. Each part is a unique expression of the whole. This, too, is a God's eye view of the world. The subjective experience from within every creature. Certainly, if whatever we mean by God, that reality is immanent and omnipresent, it's got to include this. What can we say about the nature of the whole that there's just virtually no disagreement about? I mean, very, very few scientists would take issue with this way of talking about the whole of reality. Well, it's the creator of all. That is, creativity doesn't really exist outside the universe. Creativity is immanent and omnipresent. That is, the whole of reality is creative. It's the creator of all. It knows all things, and when I say it knows all things, I don't mean it knows it in the same way that you and I do. Every level has its own ways of knowing, every nested level. I mean, you don't know how your kidneys do or your liver cells do what they do. But all knowledge is within the whole of reality, so it knows all things that are known. It reveals all things, the whole reveals all things. It's present everywhere, transcends and includes all things, expresses all forms of power, holds everything together, suffers all things, and transforms all things. Now, is it a surprise that this reality has been intuited, this undeniable reality has been intuited and then personified or relationalized in different ways in different cultures? I don't know how it could have been otherwise. It's like, of course that would have been the case. What I'm suggesting is this: seeing God as no less than a sacred personification or a proper name for the whole changes everything. When I speak in conservative audiences, typically I'll say, God may be infinitely more than a proper name for the whole of reality. But God can't possibly be less than that. And what this does is it entirely changes the conversation. For example, here are different ways of saying basically the same thing. Now you tell me if you think this is accurate or not. God is Lord. Reality rules. Nature bats last. This is a baseball metaphor. The home team bats last. Your ego does not run the show. And all creatures evolve by adapting to their environment. Or you could say the environment shapes all creatures. Can you see, as long as we don't have a trivial notion of God, can you see how these are different ways of saying basically the same thing? I mentioned that a year and a half ago I gave this program to Christians on Tuesday night and to atheists on Wednesday night. One of the Christians, a young woman, she was in her mid-20s, she said, I see how this can give me a more intimate, personal relationship to God than ever before. See, when we think of God as the supreme clockmaker outside a clockwork universe, right? Prayer is petitioning a divine being who's outside the universe to miraculously intervene according to however you're praying, right? But from a sacred, evolutionary, nested, creative understanding, prayer is like a cell in the body in communion with the very body of which it's a part. It's just so much more of an intimate notion of prayer. And somebody asked the question at the beginning in terms of a personal God. Again, if you want to relate to ultimate reality in a deeply meaningful way, personal metaphors are the most natural way of doing so. Again, you don't have to do that. It's not like anybody is forced to do that, but it's certainly legitimate to do so. And I do that. The very next night, right, one of the atheists, towards the end, he just sort of blurted out. He said, finally a God that makes sense and one that I can respect. Now, I find this hugely encouraging. Because again, if we can't find ways of cooperating across ethnic and religious differences over the course of the next 50 or 60 years, we got big, big problems as a species. And I don't think there's anything more important than helping religious people move from a way of understanding their faith traditions that's based primarily upon authority and tradition and reinterpreting their religious traditions based on evidence and this science-based public revelation. So if this is a useful distinction, the distinction between private and public revelation, what this means, among other things, is that facts are God's native tongue. Facts as God's native tongue. I mean, think about it. How did the whole of reality guide any part of the whole? Let's say bacteria. How did God guide bacteria to create multicellularity? That is how, through words? No, through feelings, circumstances, and relationships. In other words, through the facts of their existence, the facts of their reality. And that's how the whole guides most of us, is through facts. And that's why I say science as public revelation is what ultimate reality is revealing today. What this means, among other things, if this understanding of facts as God's native tongue is legitimate, is that where we go to for guidance from God, from the ultimate reality, isn't first and foremost text written 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Right? As inspiring as those may be. But where we go to first and foremost is what the whole of reality is revealing today through the entire range of sciences. Who of us would let a first century dentist fill our children's teeth? And yet so many of us let first century theologians fill our children's minds every day. It's because we've not had these distinctions. Again, I don't mean to make conservatives wrong on that. It's just that they've never been exposed to this. In fact, when I speak to conservative audiences, and I genuinely mean this, one of the questions I'll sometimes ask at the beginning is, how many of you reject an evolutionary worldview? If I get quite a few people raise their hands, typically what I'll do is I'll just stop and I'll say, now those of you who reject evolution, you're absolutely right to have rejected evolution. Now I'm silent. And I say, because the only version of evolution that most of us have ever been exposed to is a chance, meaningless, purposeless, mechanistic, cruel, directionless, godless process. And that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm silent. And then I say, now if you'll allow me to, not because I'm trying to convert you or convince you, it's okay with me if you differ, but if you're open to it, I would love to share with you why I am passionately excited about a God-glorifying, Christ-edifying, Scripture-honoring way of thinking about evolution. And I'm silent for 10 seconds. And I can usually feel the room opening up. They're going to let me speak. In fact, the first time that I ever got a chance to speak to virtually everybody there was a young earth creationist. This one gentleman, a young guy, he's probably 21 years old or so, he had his Strong's Concordance and his King James Bible laid out on the desk. He was ready to blow my butt away. And he was asking antagonistic questions at the beginning. This guy literally came up after the end of my program and gave me a bear hug and said, now you haven't converted me entirely, but I'm not threatened by your perspective. That's a huge move in an hour and a half, 2-hour program. Let me now turn to who and what are we, really, from this perspective, and why are we here? This is a fundamental, these are questions that all cosmologies, all creation stories attempt to answer. And if this science-based cosmology doesn't give us satisfactory answers to these questions, people are not going to embrace it in any kind of a religious way whatsoever. Well, Pierre Desjardins, in the 1940s, a Jesuit paleontologist, he was a Roman Catholic priest, a Jesuit, who was also a scientist. He was not allowed, his theological writings were not allowed to be published in his lifetime, right? But he said that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself. But he attributed to Julian Huxley, the great evolutionary humanist, the idea that we are evolution become conscious of itself. In fact, Julian Huxley wrote the foreword to Teilhard de Chardin's book, The Phenomenon of Man, when it came out after he died. So here you had a theist and an atheist that were best friends, and they were both what I would call creatheists or creatheists. But 130 years before these guys were saying it, a poet in 1812, Percy Shelley, said this. He said, "I am the eye with which the universe beholds itself and knows it is divine." Now, that's not bad for 1812. That's pretty good for today. Carl Sagan, when I'm in non-Christian settings, I'll typically say this morning's scripture reading is from cosmologist Carl Sagan. And it's the way he ends his Cosmos series. He says, "We are the local embodiment of a cosmos grown to self-awareness. We have begun to contemplate our origins, star stuff pondering the stars." See, we've known since 1957, and I say know rather than believe, we've known since 1957 that our bodies are literally made of stardust. Earth is our larger self. It's our larger body. See, this self and this self is the same self. It's the same me. It's the same I. This is not so much a picture of human beings looking at the earth. I mean, that's one way of talking about it, and of course it would be legitimate. But from a deep time perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, a more accurate way of talking about this would be to say that this is one of the first times that Earth became complex enough that a piece of itself could get off of itself and look back at itself. This is Earth looking in the mirror. Joanna Macy is one of my sheroes. And Joanna Macy has this great quote. She says, this shift, the shift from seeing ourselves as separate creatures that walk around on Earth in a universe, to seeing ourselves as a mode of being of Earth, an expression of the universe, she says, this shift is essential to our survival because it can serve in lieu of morality and because moralizing is so ineffective. She says, sermons seldom hinder us from pursuing our self-interest. As a preacher, I'm telling you, I can preach till I'm blue in the face, and people are going to do what's in their own perceived self-interest regardless of whatever I preach. So Joanna Macy says, we need to be a little more enlightened about what our self-interest is. For example, it would never occur to me to say to you, don't cut off your leg. No, really, don't cut off your leg. Right? Because your leg is a part of you, right? And you know that. Joanna Macy says, so are the trees in the Amazon basin. There are external lungs. And that's what we're waking up to, is that we are our world. And what we do to our world, we do to our larger body. We do to our larger self. Thomas Berry is a 92-year-old retired Passionist priest who's a cultural historian, who's one of the main mentors for most of us in this movement. Thomas Berry says that we, that is humans, are the celebrants of the universe story. We are the celebrants of the universe story. Now, celebrants is a religious term. Ministers, priests, and rabbis are said to be celebrants. So what does he mean to say that humans are the celebrants of the universe story? I know many of you are familiar with the Baltimore Catechism, because I grew up Catholic, and I know the Baltimore Catechism, the Westminster Catechism, these foundational documents that purport in the West to tell the truth about damn near everything, right? Do you remember what they say is the chief end of man, that is the purpose of humanity? What these foundational documents in the West say is the purpose of humanity, the chief end of man. Anybody remember? Yeah, exactly. To glorify God and enjoy God forever. This is the way one says. The other one says to know, love, and serve God. Now, could those be religious ways of saying the same thing that science is now saying is the role of our species? Like not just one small subset of humanity like the church, but the role of our species is to know, love, and serve God. That is to know, love, and serve the whole. To glorify God, that is to honor the whole in self-conscious reflection with full awareness. See, I think that is our role. I think that is our destiny. And I think it's a glorious destiny. So what I want to talk about now is the realizing of religion. That is, taking what we thought were supernatural or otherworldly religious ideals and realizes them. Shows how they're real for everybody, everywhere. The great story, that is the epic of evolution told in a sacred, meaningful way, reconciles science and religion. It reconciles different religions, helps us understand religious differences and value those differences. And one of the ways that it does this is through day and night language. And I want to spend a few minutes on this because many people tell me at the end of my programs, the thing that they most value, the thing that they got most out of it, especially the thing that they felt was going to be most helpful to them afterwards, is this distinction between day and night language. So I want to spend a few minutes on this because I really believe that we will never see the promises of religion fulfilled without distinguishing day and night language. Or to say it in a positive way, the only way that we'll see the promises of religion fulfilled is by distinguishing day and night language. We live in language in the way that fish live in water. We can't not make events and processes mean something as humans. Anything that happens to you, right, you're going to make it mean something. In fact, even if you say, oh, that's meaningless, you're making it mean nothing. We are meaning-making animals. So in the human world, there's the facts, there's the event, right, the facts. There's the story that we tell about it, and then there's the meaning and the metaphors that we embellish in the story of the facts. This is objective reality. That's what I call day language. This is objective reality. This is subjective. This is highly subjective. I mean, you can have genetically identical twins, right? They can have the exact same experience, like a car accident. But if they make it mean different things in their mind, in their head, that event can impact them in very different ways over the course of a lifetime. There can be wide agreement on the facts. There can be some agreement on the story. There's usually strong disagreement in terms of the interpretation. This is measurable. This is non-measurable. This is public revelation, and this is private revelation. Day language is what's so. It's the facts. It's what's objectively real. It's publicly, measurably true. Night language is, what does it mean? What's the interpretation? It's what's subjectively real. It's personally and culturally truthful. And again, because we are language-dwelling beings, our reality includes both of these. It's not just, this isn't just our reality, it's both of these. I mean, a dream feels really real when you're in the middle of it, right? It's subjectively real, but it's not objectively real in the same way. In fact, let me share the first time that I ever remembered thinking about this distinction between day and night language. I was ordained as a United Church of Christ minister in 1991. Now, I had been pastoring for 3 years, and I had been guided by this 82-year-old retired minister who had been mentoring me through the process. And I took the United Church of Christ statement of faith. You know, we believe in God, blah, 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 and I chunked it out one sentence at a time, and I interpreted it from the sacred evolutionary perspective. And those of you that are either athletes or artists, you know when you're just like at the top of your game, you just feel like you're on, you just can't get it wrong? Well, it was one of those nights. I just felt like, oh, I was on. I mean, I delivered my paper, went really well. I fielded questions, it was going great. I actually started getting a little prideful, a little bit, kind of arrogant, thinking, man, this is great, I'm a shoo-in, And then this gentleman stood up towards the back, and he was probably 65, 70 years old, and he said, Michael, he said, I've been coming to these, this is about 10 minutes left in the evening, right? He said, Michael, I've been coming to these ordination hearings for 38 years. He said, I can't tell you when I've come to one that I was more like, whoa. However, he said, and there was a certain way that he said however that, had me pause. He said, there's a little boy that lives in me, and my little boy wants to know the kind of questions that little boys often want to know about religion, things like life after death, soul, consciousness, spirit, stuff like that. In fact, what he said was, what my little boy wants to know is, where's your mentor, Emery Wallace, now that he's died? Like, what's your evolutionary theology say about that? See, as I said, I was guided for 2.5 years through the ordination process by this 82-year-old retired minister that everybody in this room knew and loved. In fact, I fell in love with this man. He had studied with Matthew Fox. He was totally into all this evolutionary theology, and he died 3 weeks before this ordination hearing. And we were all present to how sad it was. In fact, I was still grieving. Many of us were. And this guy says, the little boy in me wants to know, from your evolutionary theological perspective, where's he now? I had 2 thoughts immediately raced through my mind. One of them was, damn, this evening had gone so well. The second one was, boy, this is your ordination hearing, you better speak. And I opened my mouth and I just started speaking. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I literally just trusted the Spirit. I just trusted something would come through, and I just spoke. And whether you call it God or my unconscious or whatever, and I'm not trying to claim a miracle happened. But what I am claiming is that I don't remember using the distinction between day and night language before. Now maybe I did. Maybe I read a book or something. I don't remember. But what I said was this. I said the only way to answer the question, where is Emery now that he's died, is first to use day language, and then to use night language. And the interesting thing is, as mammals, we must dream or we will die. Did you know that? If you keep a human person or any kind of a mammal, if you keep a bear or a wolf or an elephant or a dog from dreaming, not that I would try to keep a bear or an elephant from dreaming, but we'll die. There's something about we mammals, we have to dream. And yet we dream in a whole different reality. We do things in our dreams that we wouldn't do or we couldn't do in day experience. For example, I said to him, if you asked me what I did for lunch today, and I said, I turned myself into a crow, and I flew over to the neighborhood farm and goofed around with the cows for a little bit, and then went and got a Dairy Queen milkshake, and now here I am. And like I told you, like a straight face, like that's what I'd done for lunch today. Okie dokie. However, if you said, Michael, have you had any interesting dreams lately? And I told you the exact same thing, you wouldn't bat an eye, because we all do those kinds of things in our dreams. So I said, here, let me answer the question, where is Emery now that he's died? But let me first use day language, and then I'll use night language. So first the day language side. Emery's body is being decomposed by bacteria. Ultimately, all that'll be left is his teeth and his bones. His genes continue to live on in his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and so forth. His impact, his influence, lives on in those he's touched, those they've touched, and so forth. That's the day language side. But if I stop there, I haven't told you the truth. I've told you half the truth. In order to address this whole non-measurable inner aspect of reality, I've got to use some kind of poetic or meaningful or metaphorical language. Now, it doesn't have to be otherworldly, but it traditionally has been. So I said, here, let me try. Emery is at the right hand of God the Father, worshiping and giving glory with all the saints. Or I could say Emery is being held and nurtured by God the Mother. Or I could say Emery has entered, to use a Tibetan symbol system, Emery has entered the Bardo realm. In other words, there's no one right symbol system. There's no one right mythic or poetic or religious way of talking about this inner non-measurable aspects of reality. But unless we use some kind of language over there, we're not going to address what most people need to find meaning. Why? Because facts just sit there. Uninterpreted facts don't inspire, they just sit there. And yet there's not one right way to interpret them. There's more than one inspiring way to interpret any set of facts. Albert Einstein weighed in on this. Now, he didn't use the words day and night language, but what he said was that if you interpret the world's religious scriptures scientifically, in other words, if you interpret the world's religious scriptures as day language, he said you trivialize them. And the example he used was in the book of Acts. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the book of Acts, so I'll just remind you. The first chapter of the book of Acts, you've got Jesus in his resurrected form, whatever exactly that means, is talking to his disciples, and they're saying, is now the time for the kingdom to come? And he says, it's not for you to know. These things are set by the Father. And you get the sense, if ABC News or CNN was covering this for the nightly news, right? You get the sense that Jesus in his robes just starts taking off, starts flying up, right? And just a couple hundred miles up on the other side of the dome of the heavens, he's back with God. Because that was the worldview of that day. Space only went up a few hundred miles. Time only went back a few thousand years. So if you wanted to communicate, as the author of Acts, which is said to be Luke, if you wanted to communicate that Jesus returned to the source, he returned to the Father, the way that he told that story was a completely acceptable night language way of telling that story. However, Einstein said that if you interpret the ascension of Jesus literally, okay, if Jesus flew at the speed of light, he not only wouldn't be outside the universe yet, he wouldn't be outside the Milky Way galaxy yet. And when I speak to conservatives, I typically say, I don't know about you, but seeing my Lord in orbit doesn't do anything for my spiritual sensibilities. The thought that I could look through a telescope and see the risen Christ floating up there just doesn't inspire me. So we got to realize we're talking night language here. From a flat earth understanding, right, where we're the center of the universe, everything revolves around us, the world's flat, right? Heaven and hell, for those traditions that have those concepts, are generally thought of as literal places that one's going to go to after one dies, one or the other, right? But from a sacred evolutionary, nested creative understanding, heaven and hell are universally true. It's what we all know through our experience. For example, I don't have to die to go to a place called heaven. When I'm in the place of love, compassion, generosity, care, consideration, when I'm in integrity, when I'm, humble and thoughtful, I'm in heaven now. And the same is true for you. It's true for all of us. I don't have to die to go to a place called hell. When I'm in a place of arrogance, self-righteousness, judgment, bitterness, hatred, violence, when I'm stuck in my addictions, when I'm out of integrity, I'm in hell now. And so are you. It's true for all of us. And all these concepts can be understood in this kind of a way. It's the realizing of religion, making real these concepts, these abstractions. In fact, when anybody talks to me about any religious concept, whatever, I'll always ask, are you meaning that in an abstract, imaginary, otherworldly way? Or are you meaning that in an experiential, undeniably real way? Here's the same thing said in day language and night language. Now, first I'm going to say it in day language, and then I'm going to say it in night language. Nothing is itself without everything else. This is not considered a belief. This is considered factual knowledge. Again, this is what 98% of the scientists of the world would agree with. In fact, did any of you see Carl Sagan's Cosmos series when it came out in the 80s? It was great. One of my favorite scenes, you've got Carl, first of all, you've got these galaxies and stuff, and then Carl's at Oxford University. They're baking him an apple pie. And he's at this grand table, they bring him the apple pie, and the first words out of his mouth are these. He says, "It takes an entire universe to make an apple pie." In other words, nothing is itself without everything else. Here's the same thing said in night language. God makes all things possible. Can you see how these are different ways of saying the same thing as long as we don't have a trivial notion of God? Oh, think about this. I love this. Every characteristic that we attribute to the divine derives from our experience of the world. If we imagine God as beautiful, gracious, loving, awesome, powerful, majestic, or faithful, it is because we have known or experienced beauty, grace, love, awe, power, majesty, or trustworthiness in the world. If we lived on the moon, and that's all we and our ancestors had ever known, all of our concepts and experience of the divine would reflect the barrenness of the lunar landscape. Now, this is obvious when we think about it. We're just not used to thinking in these terms. I love this quote from Dowd. He said, "The movement into time is the most significant event in 2 million years of hominid intelligence." That's an amazing claim he's making. And then Stephen Toulmin, one of the great philosophers of history, said this. He said, "In the whole history of human thought, no transformation in human attitudes toward nature has been more profound than the change in perspective brought about by the discovery of the past." And then Alfred North Whitehead, I love this one. "Religion will not regain its old power until it faces change in the same spirit as does science." So that's what I want to talk about now, is how is religion going to change? How is religion going to evolve? First of all, let me say this, that flat earth religion is not people who believe the world is flat. It's where your religious symbols, metaphors, doctrines, and theology still reflect a spatial, flat earth cosmology. Evolutionary religion is where your religious symbols, metaphors, doctrines, and theology reflect a time developmental, evolutionary cosmology. And all religions are moving from their flat earth understandings to their evolutionary understandings. See, flat earth Christianity is not the same thing as evolutionary Christianity. Flat earth Islam is not the same thing as evolutionary Islam. And this is not an easy process for many people. Coming back to this distinction between private and public revelation, private revelation produces belief-based, doctrine-centered religion. Public revelation produces knowledge-based, practice-centered religion. One is grounded in a flat earth cosmology, the other is grounded in an evolutionary cosmology. One emphasizes past miracles and unnatural future hopes. See, when I use the word unnatural, when you hear the word supernatural, you can also think unnatural. Supernatural and unnatural are synonyms. In fact, when I believed that Jesus was coming down on the clouds and I was going to fly up to meet with him, that was an unnatural future hope. Evolutionary religion is evolutionary, Christianity, evolutionary Hinduism, evolutionary of the different traditions, is grounded in the past and present facts, and the future is emerging. See, the old debate, is it all just determined by an all-knowing God, or is it all just random chance? It's a false dichotomy. See, the universe is creative, and creativity has elements that had to be and elements that are purely free. Flat Earth religion is non-falsifiable and non-measurable. Thus, it's deniable. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Well, some people believe yes, some people believe no. Did you know that there's over 24 stories? I was able to find 25 stories in the ancient world of virgin births. Now, are none of them true, or some of them true, or all of them true? Well, it's debatable. Some people believe yes, some people believe no. Evolutionary religion is falsifiable and measurable. That's because it's grounded in the sciences first. Thus, it becomes practically undeniable once there's a wide enough consensus. And then finally, one is threatened by change, and the other is blessed by change. Here are what I think are going to be the four major distinctions between flat earth Christianity and evolutionary Christianity, or flat earth Islam and evolutionary Islam. Flat earth religion is sourced in private revelation. Thus, the emphasis is subjective believing. I mean, having the right beliefs, that's the key, right? That's your ticket in many traditions, having the right beliefs. Evolutionary religion is sourced in public revelation. Thus, the emphasis is on what we objectively know. But where does flat earth religion experience its doctrines, its major core concepts? Well, in the imagination. Because anything that you're not experiencing in the present moment, you've got to be imagining, thinking about, right, in the past, or you've got to be thinking about that as imagining in the future, right? If you're not experiencing in the present moment, you've got to be imagining it one way or the other. I mean, where does traditional Christianity say that the creation happened? Back there. Where's the second coming of Christ going to happen? Out there. Where's heaven? Up there. Where's hell? Down there. Not here, not now. Right? Somewhere else in time and somewhere else in space, but not here and not now. And what was the creation like? What's the second coming going to be like? What's heaven going to be like? What's hell going to be like? Well, they're based on our this world experience. They're abstracted from our this world experience. For example, you can't understand pearly gates unless you understand pearls and gates. Evolutionary religion is grounded in what's eternal. That is what's real here now always. See, eternity is not a whole bunch of time strung together. It's not an infinite amount of time. It's being outside of time. It's transcendent of time. And it's what we all experience. It's universally true because it's what we experience. It's not just what we believe. Flat earth religion, the primacy is in night language. Where you go to first is night language. That's what's foreground. Thus, the emphasis is on the miraculous. I mean, if you want to prove that God, or if you want to show that God was involved, there better be a miracle somewhere. I mean, even in the Catholic Church today, if you want to become a saint, you've got to have done 2 miracles. Evolutionary religion, the primacy, where you go to first, is the science, the day language. So you need to have both. It's not a matter of one above the other, as we were sharing before, but it's a matter of which one do you go to first. And there, the emphasis is on what's undeniable. See, God can be either understood as unsubstantial or undeniable. And the classic example, the proof in my mind that God has become a trivial concept is the fact that Richard Dawkins, right, a world-renowned atheist and one of the most famous scientists of our generation, of our time, can write a best-selling book called The God Delusion. You'd never catch anybody writing a book, or at least nobody would buy a book, called The Life Delusion. The universe delusion. Why? Because life and the universe are not trivial concepts. They're undeniably real. And so this is an undeniable way of understanding. And then finally, flat earth religion supports cooperation among the members of my tribe or my religion. I mean, the 10 Commandments, right? The 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill, applied to who? Yeah, other Hebrews. It's okay to wipe out the Philistines. 20 million Canaanites, destroy them all, thus saith the Lord. Now, I'm not picking on the Jews. I'm not picking on the Hebrews. You please hear this. Most religious traditions, not all, but most religious cultures, had sacred stories that tell us why we're supposed to cooperate and why we're supposed to demonize them. And of course, we got stories doing the same thing. Evolutionary religion supports cooperation across ethnic and religious differences. And until we have a whole lot more evolutionary Christians, evolutionary Muslims, and evolutionary Jews, right, we're not going to have lasting peace in the Middle East. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be working for it. It just means we've got to be doing this worldview work. So people can sometimes say to me, okay, Michael, I see how science is spurring religion to grow and evolve. I mean, that much makes sense. But you seem to be somehow suggesting that religion is helping science. Like, what on earth can you possibly mean by faith ushering reason into its greatness? Like, what? Here's what I mean. The last 3 centuries of scientific exploration have been the most sustained meditation ever carried out by human beings on the nature of reality. The scientific enterprise has been a collective spiritual as well as a collective intellectual quest. While it has rarely been recognized as such, science is in fact empirical theology. Scientists are empirical theologians. Now, I'm not saying that all scientists see themselves this way, of course, but remember the St. Thomas Aquinas quote that any mistake about creation necessarily results in a mistake about God, and God can't possibly be less than a sacred personification or a proper name for ultimate reality or for the whole of reality? So the more we're learning about the nature of the whole, the more we're learning about the divine. So let me begin winding down here. A mythic, meaningful interpretation of cosmic history, which is not the same thing as a secular, meaningless interpretation. But a mythic, meaningful interpretation of cosmic history realizes the divine, that is, it untrivializes God. It gives us a God worthy of the name and clearly deserving of our devotion and loving service. It reveals who and what we really are and why we're here, to serve God, to glorify God, to serve the whole. It realizes religion, that is, it shows how inspiration and reason are spurring each other to greatness. And it shows how our way into the future is clear and unambiguous. That's what I'm suggesting, is that your way into a healthy future, my way into a healthy future, and our species' way into a healthy future is the same thing. Now this is a day language way of saying it. You can probably guess what a night language way would sound like. God's will is obvious and universal. We don't have to go to ancient books to realize what God's will is. It's obvious and it's universal. That is, God's will is the same for all of us. That is, individually and collectively. Getting right with God, which would be a night language way of saying it. Coming into right relationship with reality, which would be a day language way of saying it. And what I'm suggesting is that there's only one way to our salvation. And it's what I call evolutionary integrity. Now, you could also say Christ-like evolutionary integrity. I'm not going to get into how that's the case, but whether you interpret the story of Jesus in the New Testament as pure fact in all of its details or pure fiction in all of its details, it doesn't matter, or anything in between. If you take a straightforward reading of that story embodies the 4 principles of what I call evolutionary integrity, or the DNA of deep integrity. So what does it mean to be in evolutionary integrity personally? Like, what does it mean for you and me to be in evolutionary integrity? Well, whatever else it means, it's got to include these 2 things. To love and serve the whole with passion and humility. And when I say passion and humility, I mean both. Because if all you've got is passion, but you're an arrogant SOB, nobody's even going to want to be around you. But if all you've got is humility, it's like, well, what can I do? And being committed to your own evolution and being committed to humanity's evolution. Whatever else being in evolutionary integrity means as individuals has got to include these two. And I don't think it's a coincidence that these so closely match. When the Pharisees asked Jesus, like, come on, teacher, tell us, what's the whole law? Sum up, like in a nutshell. He says, love the Lord your God as love the whole with all you got, everything you got, your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. I don't think it's a surprise or a coincidence that it so closely matches these. Now, what does evolutionary integrity mean collectively? Like, what does it mean for the human species to be in evolutionary integrity? Well, again, whatever else it means, it's got to include these two. To increasingly align self-interest and global well-being, and to inspire and empower the world's scientists, poets, artists, musicians, storytellers, filmmakers, and TV producers to tell our common creation story in ways that traditional religious people can celebrate as sacred and as holy. Now, why do I think these are the key? Because the dream drives the action. That is, our vision of what's possible or what's inevitable or what's likely in the future either wakes us up fired up and excited to co-create a healthy world or overwhelmed and depressed. And Connie and I do not believe that we don't try to convert anybody to this perspective. In fact, this last week I was interviewed for an hour by a young earth creationist on the largest radio talk show in Michigan. This guy was a young earth 6,000-year-old creationist. I refused to get in a debate with him because I'm not interested in that. I believe that the one with the best story wins. If we can articulate, and I don't mean just me and Connie, but if we can articulate this big picture understanding in the way that young people especially go, well, like, duh, of course, it just has to be more inspiring. And remember this chart? I talked about how evolution precedes greater complexity, greater interdependence, and greater cooperation at larger and wider scale, is that each level has to figure out how to align the self-interest of the part with the well-being of the whole. Right? That's the key. So here's as bold as I'm going to be this evening. How can we further the evolutionary impulse, that is what the whole has been up to for billions of years, and govern ourselves as a species, locally, regionally, nationally, and globally, so that the real and effective incentives, key word, for individuals, corporations, and nation states to cooperate and serve the common good, meaning they each benefit by doing so, and equally effective incentives for them not to cheat, dominate, pollute, or otherwise harm the common good. In other words, how do we create laws, taxes, and moral incentives to successfully motivate individuals and groups to do the just and ecologically beneficial thing and to not do the unjust or ecologically harmful thing? Folks, this is not rocket science. Bacteria figured out how to do this twice without brains. Maybe that's the problem, right? But see, until we do this, we're going to have a system like what we now have, where the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do is usually the wrong thing to do. But when we do this, the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do becomes, in most cases, the right thing to do. Let me say it as like insanely bold as I possibly can. If I could sum up all the dumb and stupid stuff that we're doing as a species and boil it down to the one thing that I think is most immature about the human species. Now notice I said immature, I didn't say evil. But the one thing I think that is most immature above everything else about the human species at this time in history, I think it's this. That we have an economic system and a way of governing ourselves. Governance and economics, where it's possible and it's profitable for a subset of the whole to benefit at the expense of the whole. It's possible and it's profitable, that is, for an individual or a corporation to get wealthy at the expense of the community or the bioregion of the planet it's a part of. And until we redesign that system, we're going to have good, moral people that read their Bibles every day, that go to church every Sunday, that send their kids to the best colleges and universities possible to learn how to do the worst thing best. We've got to redesign the system. Now, fortunately, there are some major players that get this. However, in democratically elected societies, how do we get enough of us to get this, to vote it into office? To vote it into being? Well, that's question number 2. How can the epic of evolution, that is our common creation story, be told in a multitude of personally and collectively meaningful ways, sacred, mythic, religious ways, so that it inspires billions of human beings with different worldviews to really want and then to successfully manifest the above vision? My life is devoted to these two questions. So coming back to what I call the three great gifts of the great story, why I thank God for evolution, is that a sacred understanding of evolution realizes religion, it sanctifies science, and reveals the true magnitude of both. It offers a clear, realistically inspiring, and empowering vision of our way into a just, healthy, beautiful, and sustainably life-giving future for as many species as possible. And then finally, a sacred understanding of evolution positively transforms people's lives and relationships in a more consistent, comprehensive, and ongoing way than traditional religion generally can. Now, how? I mean, it's a big claim I'm making. How do I see that happening? Because evolution provides a much more realistic understanding of our instincts, the human condition, than was ever possible before. And this comes out of the realms of evolutionary psychology, evolutionary brain science, evolutionary ethics and morality, and human universals. Connie and I are developing a new program that goes into this in great depth. I'll just tease you with one thing. In evolutionary psychology, there's a thing called mismatch theory. That is, our instincts evolved in a world that is not matched for the world that we now live in. There's a mismatch between our instincts and the world we now live in. For example, none of us chooses to be attracted to foods that have sugar, salts, and fats. We just find ourselves attracted to foods that have sugar, salts, and fats, right? Why? Because for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for those things allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. Yet today, it's very easy to find those things. Did you know that there's a scientifically proven correlation between the amount of testosterone in the human organism and how much that organism tends to think about sex, and also how much the risk that organism tends to take? There's a woman, a friend of mine in California, who had to wear testosterone patches. She was on a hormonal therapy. She said, I can't stop thinking about sex. Is this what guys have to deal with? The answer is yes. And it's not just guys, right? And the interesting thing is, women and men can have a certain base level of testosterone, in other words, okay, right? But if they get voted into office, or if they get ordained, or if they get promoted, or if any rise in status, where people start looking up to them, right? Their testosterone levels are going to shoot through the roof. And this is true of all mammals and all primates, including humans. So it's not a surprise that we find people in positions of leadership and responsibility falling to sexual scandal. Because if they don't know this, and if they think that all of a sudden, they got a great relationship with their wife, but all of a sudden they got sex on the brain, right? And if they think it's because they're fundamentally flawed or evil or sinful, or because their great-great-great-great-great-grandmother ate an apple, they're not going to have the freedom and know how to be in impeccable integrity. This perspective has made it so much easier for me and other people to stay in impeccable integrity. let me conclude with a story of awakening. This isn't a story of an epiphany, an aha, a conversion, if you will, to evolution. Connie's niece, Halsey Barlow, she's now 21. Halsey grew up in a very conservative Roman Catholic family. And Halsey went to nursing school, and Halsey, the first class, first semester, she's got an ecology class. It's not even an evolution class. It's an ecology class, and she has a 29-year-old attractive male professor who's a fanatic about evolution. And he has them do a 6-week component on evolution. And he has them write a paper, and she has to write a paper on Madagascan lemurs, and she sent us this email. She said, it happened as I was doing research for a paper I was writing on the evolution of lemurs. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with lemurs, but they're a female-dominant society and completely lack sexual dimorphism. That is a difference in size between males and females. It turns out that all this can be explained as a result of lemurs evolving to conserve energy. At this point, I just had to put the article down and try to absorb it. Basically, I had an epiphany. Evolution is beautiful. I mean, like, she got it, right? And then she read Robert Wright's award-winning book, The Moral Animal, Why We Are the Way That We Are, the new science of evolutionary psychology, right? Connie, my wife, when she read this book the first time, she said she wished that every 13-year-old girl in the world would read this book, because then they would understand why boys are different. And then she sent us this email. We call it the parable of the pickle jar. She says, I can honestly say that I now put everything into an evolutionary context. It's almost become a sort of reaction or impulse that when I encounter a situation, I think, okay, why am I feeling this way? How and why would my 780th great-grandmother react to this? It doesn't even have to be anything significant. For instance, if I see one of my roommates snacking on my jar of pickles, I get this feeling in my stomach like, hey, back off, those are mine, mine, mine. I want to be laid back and not care, but my instincts are so darn uptight. But knowing that I'm a selfish, status-seeking hornball only motivates me to do things that say, F you to my evolutionary roots, even though I really do love them. I absolutely love how imperfect and clumsy we are as humans. I mean, almost any situation can be laughed off if we only step back and take a look at why we feel the way that we do. I love it. I wouldn't want it any other way. Now, is that amazing for an 18-year-old? I know some 60-year-olds that don't have this level of witness. Somebody sent us this. I love it. The universe becomes self-conscious. Eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce. Eat, survive, reproduce. What's it all about? And we wonder why we occasionally struggle with issues related to food safety and sex. I mean, come on. So just to recap some of the main points that I made this morning. The distinction between private and public revelation. The nested emergent nature of divine creativity. God, or the goddess if you prefer, is a legitimate, though not necessary, proper name for ultimate reality or for the whole. Facts are God's native tongue. Religious abstractions can be realized by distinguishing and appreciating the difference between day and night experience and day and night language. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself, and our purpose is to serve God, to serve the whole, and further evolution's tendency towards greater cooperation and complexity. And integrity is our only way into the future. Tell me a creation story more wondrous than that of a living cell forged from the residue of an exploded star. Tell me a story of transformation more magical than that of a fish hauling out onto land and becoming amphibian, or that of a reptile taking to the air and becoming bird, or that of a mammal slipping back into the sea and becoming whale. Surely, this science-based culture of all cultures can find meaning and cause for celebration in its very own cosmic creation story. I found this quote on the cover of the national publication for the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1998. Somebody gave this to me, and I was so blown out of the water and impressed by this quote, I decided I needed to track down and marry the author. And that's pretty much a true story, folks. So I'd like to conclude with a quote. And this will give you a sense of why Connie and I live on the road, and why we'll probably live on the road the rest of our lives. And this is from Brian Swim. It goes like this. I am convinced that the story of the universe that's come out of 3 centuries of modern scientific work will be recognized as a supreme human achievement, the scientific enterprise's central gift to humanity. I'm convinced, he says, that the story of the universe that's come out of 3 centuries of modern scientific work will be recognized as a supreme human achievement, the scientific enterprise's central gift to humanity. For the first time in human history, we finally have a creation story that's not tied to one cultural tradition, nor to a political ideology, but instead gathers every human group into its meanings. We are in the midst of a revelatory experience of the universe that must be compared in its magnitude with those of the great religious revelations. And we need only wander about telling this great story to ignite a transformation of humanity. Connie and I have taken that last sentence very literally. Thank you.